Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us today at the Toronto Catholic School Board's Budget Virtual Town Hall. We're just going to kick things off right away. Session starting at 6 o'clock. A reminder, you're going to be spending the next hour and a half with us. I'm going to just quickly walk everyone through some housekeeping things. So firstly, I'm Shazia Vlahos. I'm the Chief of Communications for the board, and I will be this evening's moderator. I will be taking in all the questions that we've received in advance and questions that are coming in real time. And I will be passing along the questions over to some of our panelists, who I will be introducing you shortly as well. So thanks again, everyone, for taking the time to share your important feedback today. As our stakeholders, your questions are really important in informing our budget process. I just want to remind everyone, our survey will open tomorrow. You have not missed it. You've not received it yet. It will be coming into your inboxes tomorrow. So that's for all of our staff, all of our families, and all of our other stakeholders. For tonight's town hall, please send your questions on the Zoom webinar by clicking the Q&A button at the bottom and then typing your question in. And then I will see the questions. And like I said, I will then pass them on to a member of the panel. You can also send your questions in by typing it in the comment section of the YouTube feed, if that's how you're watching this evening session. Okay, so with that, I'm actually going to pass it over to Ryan Putnam, who is our Chief Financial Officer, who is going to begin this evening by leading us in a prayer.
Thank you, Shazia, and good evening, everybody. I hope you've had a good day, and thanks for taking some time to join us this evening. As we pause for a moment before we start into our evening, just ask everyone to just quiet themselves for 5 seconds, just to put them into a space of reflection and readiness for prayer. What I'm going to do for us this evening is actually, I'm going to read Psalm 46, and I think it's contextual to our time. There's often a misconception of Psalm 46:10, be still and know that I am God, that it conveys a sense of serene and peacefulness, and that everything is good. And we know that actually right now we're in challenging times in our world. We, of course, pray for those that are affected by what is going on in the Ukraine, what is also going on in other countries. We just ask for the Lord's presence to be with us as we work through these challenging times. And so I feel that Psalm 46 is certainly contextual to where we're at right now. So I'm going to just begin in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, and read to you Psalm 46. God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth give way and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam and the mountains quake with their surging. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy place where the Most High dwells. God is within her, she will not fall. God will help her at break of day. Nations are in uproar, kingdoms fall. He lifts his voice, the earth melts. The Lord Almighty is with us, the God of Jacob is our fortress. Come and see what the Lord has done, the desolations he's brought on the earth. He makes wars cease to the ends of the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear. He burns the shields with fire. He says, be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord Almighty is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. May the peace of God be with us as we move forward in these trying times. Thank you, Shazia.
Thanks so much, Ryan, for that beautiful prayer. So now I'm going to read the land acknowledgement. Out of our deep respect for Indigenous peoples in Canada, we acknowledge that all Toronto Catholic District School Board properties are situated upon traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Wendat peoples. We also acknowledge the land covered by Treaty 13 is held by the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and Toronto is subject to the Dish with One Spoon Covenant. We also recognize the contributions and enduring presence of all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples in Ontario and the rest of Canada. So with that, everybody, I'm actually going to, I would like to introduce all of the panelists, but what I might do is actually introduce everybody at the end of Ryan's presentation. So we're going to move right into that. Our CFO, Mr. Putnam, is going to be presenting for the next 15 minutes to give you a sense of sort of what to expect as part of the budget process, some considerations, and then we're going to have at least an hour, if not more, time to answer your questions. And at that time, I will introduce the panelists. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Ryan.
Thank you, Shazia. Good evening, everyone. Apologies. There we go. Get that back up again. There we are. Okay, so this evening I'm just going to spend, as Shazia's mentioned, about 15 minutes just walking through the budget framework for next year, and as well just to touch on next steps in our stakeholder consultation plan. This is a presentation that's been reviewed with our Board of Trustees, and we're using it to not only in our community session this evening, but for other consultation conversations with other board level committees, and as well with our labor partners. And so it's a good starting point for us. I always do like to reference our budget along with anything that we do back to scripture. And the reason we use John 15:5 is I think it's important for us to remember that our strategic plan and our strategic priorities, which are focused on students, that's our vine, that's our touchstone, and everything we do, whether it's in the budget or our action plans, should tie back into that core central strategic plan. And so that's a really good reference point, I think, John 15:5. Matthew 25:40 is a verse I think many of us are familiar with. And for us as a board, the Board of Trustees, and as a senior team, that should be the final sort of lens that we put on anything, which is making sure that we're supporting those in need within our system, various needs, from learning needs to other staff and students alike, recognizing the different needs of our community. But I think ultimately, Matthew 25:40 is something that we always keep in mind, both at the beginning and end of any conversation. And then lastly, 1 Corinthians 12:12. I reference that because our board is, quite a complex ecosystem. And I think it's really important that everybody realizes that they're an important part of forming the one body of Toronto Catholic. And so always like to come back to that as a touchstone as well. We are guided by a number of guiding principles when we are working through our budget process, and quite frankly, almost any of our conversations. It is strategic plan and student center focused. One of the things we're attempting to do is to maintain system stability. It's been a challenging couple of years. We also know that we need to create flexibility so that we can adapt to things as they surface. We're really intentional at this time of year. The budget process is not really an event. It's actually just part of an ongoing process of making sure that we're aligning our resources, that we're integrating our not only our resources, but our efforts so that we're all going in the same direction. It's better to do a few things well than do a lot of things not as well. Of course, there's an expectation that we should be efficient in what we do, effective in terms of what we do, but also that if we're introducing initiatives, that they're sustainable. Everything really, we try to make it evidence-based and measurable so that we're making good informed decisions. We do have to prioritize. I know that can be frustrating at times, but we can't do everything. And so we are mindful that we have to prioritize and that everything has an opportunity cost when we make a decision to go one way or another. We are always looking at an organization our size of managing our risk and making sure that we're compliant, and as well, transparency and accountability, although those can be terms that are used often, and without authenticity, I can tell you that that's absolutely our goal, is always to be transparent with our community, transparent in the boardroom, transparent with each other, and we hold each other to account as well. And we take very seriously our responsibility to be accountable to our broader community. This evening, there are about a half dozen slides that are just quick touchstones that really culminate in sort of an overall budget framework to get a sense of where we're at now and what our plan is as we look ahead to next year's budget and beyond. It's not all heavy on the numbers. It's a lot of concepts so that we can keep it more in terms of the big picture at this time. And as we do our consultation, we'll be looking for feedback on things that are really tangible and realistic that we might be able to affect that could be impactful for next year within this broader framework. Our current financial position is that we are using $34 million of our reserves this year to support the budget. It's really based on two areas or two reasons. There are COVID supports and investments that the board needed to make and felt that it needed to make over the last 2 years that are beyond what the province was funding. And as well, we had a decline in enrollment that was unanticipated in September. I'll speak about that a little further in a few minutes. And we wanted to make sure that that we maintained our core system supports in September after the school year had started. And so we've used our reserve to offset the effect of losing enrollment for the reduced revenue in the fall after school had started, but not upsetting the system by making a lot of changes. We do have some other reserves that we do have that are strategic reserves in the area of information technology to support key systems replacement and basic infrastructure needs just to keep things going. Those are more intermittent spends and can tend to be a little bit more expensive than you would have available to you in any given budget year. So setting the funds aside and having those available to use as needed is a good practice. As well, we support our administrative facilities. Similarly, there's not funding to support those types of buildings. And so we do have to be mindful that we need to keep them in good repair and safe. We have other reserves as well that over the years have been priorities. Outdoor playground reserve, which is now part of our annual facility and capital plan. Student equity, there's been a reserve that's supported our communities and our system. It has been fully depleted and fully dispersed, but I'll come back to that a little later about investments in equity now that that reserve has been depleted. And then there's a really small nominal amount in terms of our trustees initiatives, about 50,000 that's accumulated over time when the trustees don't spend all of their annual expense entitlements. They have a little bit available to support some small seed initiatives. So moving along, this is really sort of the foundational component of our budget framework for this year is we are having to address a significant decline in enrollment from last year. And when we go back 2 years to pre-pandemic levels, it's a fairly significant drop of about 4,000 students that we'll be accounting for this coming September. I will note that it's not been a phenomenon of students leaving our board and going to the coterminous, so to Toronto District School Board, but rather all boards in Toronto are seeing a migration and loss of enrollment as families, quite frankly, through the pandemic have moved out of Toronto, quite a few to the surrounding GTA regions, where those boards are actually seeing an increase in their enrollment. And it has a lot to do with being out of the city during COVID, taking advantage of the swing in the real estate markets and opportunities, the change to remote work and modern work environments that minimize the impact of commuting. So families have moved out of the city if their commute requirements have lessened. All of those culminating factors have led towards Toronto having this unique challenge right now. For us, unfortunately, that means less revenue. And as well, looking ahead to the next couple of years, even with some return of development in terms of the City of Toronto and their plans, we still are expecting that this phenomenon is going to continue, albeit at a lesser rate, over the next couple of years. So we are going to need to adjust our system to the loss of revenue. There are a number of staffing levels and part of our organizational structure that is simply based on enrollment. It's commensurate with enrollment. And so we'll be making adjustments to right size the system. I do need to note that adjustments or right sizing or resetting is not reduction of service and supports. It's actually just resetting what we have in terms of our staffing requirements to provide the usual expected service levels and programs, albeit just with less students. And so that is our main focus for this year, which is right sizing the system. There has been, the ministry's been good to give us our funding information early in February so that we can begin planning. I apologize for the acronyms, but really what it's saying there is that we are aware of the different revenue sources that we tend to not find out about until later into the spring. So it's really helpful we know now. There has been a continuation or commitment of some funding areas that are contingent on the provincial bargaining and provincial contracts. So the contracts with the different labor partners do expire in August this year. And so during next year, there'll be negotiations. The ministry has committed to providing continuance of the funding that they had negotiated last time that boards are using for certain programs and staffing to carry that through next year. So while they're bargaining, there's not an interruption to those supports. We are also starting to have the direction around mandated e-learning. We're working through that. There's some funding adjustments that we need to work through while we start to introduce the program. In terms of transportation, there is some funding increases. However, it doesn't cover the real cost of transportation in terms of increase year to year. When you look at things like driver wages, the cost of fuel, the cost of buying buses, which typically come from the States, impact of foreign exchange, et cetera. So there has been an increase, which we appreciate, but it doesn't fully cover our costs. There is funding for utilities, for the extra ventilation costs, and for extra cleaning supplies. So we're grateful for that. And there has been the announcement, it's new, and the focus is on the Learning Recovery Action Plan, which is a 5-point action plan from the ministry. The primary focus and investment has been on the tutoring that's been announced to support students that have had significant learning loss. However, there's more to learning recovery than just the tutoring, and we're starting to unpack what that means in terms of the supports we want to have intentionally in the system. We are making some investments, notwithstanding the decline in enrollment. There are some areas that require some intentional additional funds. I spoke earlier about the equity reserve being depleted, so we are intentionally adding $2 million into our base annual operating budget so that we can continue to invest and support in the equity portfolio. That could be supports in staffing, system supports and resources, and as well, EPAN is our Poverty Action Network support for schools, where we provide certain communities with additional support to help offset the reality of their demographics and challenges. We're also starting to invest intentionally in technology with the multi-year device strategy, and we've started to bring that in its early formation to the Board of Trustees for feedback, looking at what grades we provide certain levels of technology and device support. And so we're starting off by getting at least $4 million added into the budget so we can start to grow that program and get devices out into the system and into the hands of students. We are focusing, as I mentioned earlier, on learning recovery. There's also been reports come out under Right to Read and as well kindergarten readiness that are going to influence and inform where we're focusing some of our program-related staffing and supports for the next year. Special education, definitely an area of interest. There is a portion of the special education funding that is tied to enrollment. There will be some adjustments, but again, those will be adjustments that are just natural in terms of how many staff we have to support the number of students that we have. However, we're not changing any of the programs or the service levels, and we're looking to maintain the core support staffing disciplines more or less in the areas of, say, educational assistants, child and youth workers, social work, et cetera. So really, it's just a matter of adjusting the staffing levels to the number of students we have, but not changing our actual service levels and the nature of the programs. We are now in a more digital, modernized world of learning, and so there are new digital and remote learning resources, licenses, and supports that we're going to be continuing to introduce as we evolve. We'll always have core investments in faith formation, supports in religion resources, in our core system programs, French immersion, international languages, our arts and culture programs. Those are all key system programs that there'll be no change from this year to the next. We're budgeting for continuing those programs as they are. We'll continue to focus on student well-being, student achievements, pathways, opportunities for all students, and overall student success. Health and safety is a non-negotiable for us, and we do focus on strategic risk management. Basically, what we're going to have to do, though, given our financial constraints, is what we call a net zero exercise. So anything in terms of shifting in new directions, we're going to have to be looking at taking our current resources, our current staffing, and making sure that we're focusing people and our funds in the directions that I've spoke of without interrupting our core programs and services. And so we are working within some constraints, but we're also we're just making some subtle shifts so that we can start to move ahead on the initiatives and priorities that have been announced. So our overall budget framework really is that we've got to address the $34 million that we're using in reserves this year. That will happen naturally through resetting the system or right sizing our system for staffing levels to enrollment. The same with the loss of revenue, and the same with there's a little bit of an impact that as you decline, you can't make all the adjustments in 1 year to match your revenue loss. So there's a little bit of an impact there. So we have about a $50 million starting point, and it sounds like a lot. And on $1 billion, it's not a small number. But the decline in enrollment and that system right sizing actually will naturally take care of most of it, which is why we don't need to look for program curtailment and cuts and reductions right now to address it. We simply need to deal with system right sizing and resetting our staffing to actual levels. We'll deal with our transportation and our facility services so that there's not a drain from the classroom or from the bottom line. We are continuing to review what our COVID investments and supports need to be into the fall. We're moving from a post-COVID lens to a post-pandemic lens, knowing that COVID is likely to be with us for a while. So we're making sure that we have the supports and investments there. And I've discussed equity, technology, learning, recovery, and right to read already. In terms of stakeholder consultation, we are meeting with our various partners, the Special Education Advisory Committee. I met with them last evening, Catholic Parent Involvement Committee. I'll be meeting with them later in the month, same with the WAPC. CSLIT is our student senate, so our student leaders from our high schools. I'll be meeting with them for the student voice as well this month. We have met with our labor partners so that there's an understanding of the direction we're going and the possible adjustments to any of their membership. We're having our virtual town hall this evening. We will be inviting you to input, as Shazia has mentioned. We will be moving forward with a system survey. And again, the survey really is intended to not so much capture big picture new ideas. We've just gone through a comprehensive consultation process to renew our strategic plan for the next 3 years. That is our roadmap, but we are looking for tangible, realistic suggestions, little things that we can do, hopefully, and introduce that will make a difference, that will have an impact in the schools, in the classroom, and how people, staff are able to do their jobs, things that we can do for next year that are realistic. And so we look forward to getting the input from our community and hearing what folks have to suggest and offer. And then lastly, just in terms of process, last month we did bring an initial funding overview, the enrollment projections and our staffing projections to the board, just along with the budget framework. We're doing our consultation right now. We're starting to really look at our priorities, the pressures that we have, and finalize our plan. I will be bringing this year's budget, our second quarter, so the mid-year point was February 28th. So I'll be bringing a second quarter year-to-date position to the board in a couple of weeks' time, along with the forecast for our year-end position, so that we can have a sense if there might be any funds available to us for contingency or for possible softening in terms of the impact of some of the adjustments we have to make while we go through this budget process. The senior team is in weekly conversation as we work through things. We will table a preliminary draft budget to the board in May, the final budget in June. And then we need to start looking ahead and doing some multi-year budget planning and start to have some conversation about future considerations and options as we look ahead. So I'm going to come off of screen share. I'm going to return the session to Shazia with thanks, and we look forward to your questions and answer opportunity over the next hour or so. Thanks, Shazia.
Thank you so much, Ryan. Okay, so we're actually going to be jumping right into the questions in just a few moments. I do want to take a moment here to introduce our panelists. So joining our Chief Financial Officer, Ryan Putnam, who just gave the presentation, we have a number of key central staff that are also here to support with responding to questions that we received tonight. First, we have Derek Boyce, our Associate Director of Facilities, Business Services, and Capital Development. We have Shauna Campbell, our Executive Superintendent of Field Services, Christina Fernandez, Executive Superintendent of Student Achievement, Innovation, and Wellbeing. We have Steve Camacho, the Executive Superintendent of Technologies, Data, and Strategic Transformation. We have Lori DeMarco, Superintendent of Curriculum, Leadership, and Innovation. We also have Michael Liberto, our Superintendent of Planning and Development Services. And we have Milka Zlomislich, Superintendent of Capital Development, Asset Management and Renewal. I want to thank Emma Moynihan and Silvio, who are sort of behind the scenes supporting us today with making sure IT is working for us well, and of course also monitoring the questions as they come in. A reminder to all of you that have just joined us, you can submit questions live using the Q&A box feature on the Zoom link, as well as if you're joining us through YouTube, you can add your questions in the comment section, and we will be sure to respond to those today. I'll also say any questions that we don't have an opportunity to respond to in this evening session, tomorrow morning when you receive the survey, when it goes live, you'll also have a link to our frequently asked questions where any unanswered budget questions will also be updated in the days ahead. I notice we also have a number of other superintendents that aren't panelists that are here joining us in this session, as well as a number of our trustees. The ones I know that I can see right now, just thank you for joining. I know we have Trustee Maria Rizzo, Trustee Michael Grande, Trustee Angela Kennedy, Gary Tanwan, and Nancy Crawford. Thanks everyone for joining. So with that, going to jump into the first question. And actually, I should just remind everybody, the session is being recorded. So your questions, there will be a record of the questions. You have a choice to have your name appear or make your name anonymous if you would like. Just want to let you know that, again, if you want to ask a question, please use the boxes and we will get to those. So first question, what's going to happen with the facilities budget? COVID is spiking again, and it looks like it's here to stay. We need proper protection to do our work along with everyone else. I am going to pass that question over to Derek Boyce.
There we go. Can you hear me, Shazia?
Yes, we can hear you, Derek. Thanks.
Sorry about that, having some technical difficulties. Could you repeat the question again? My apologies.
No worries. Okay, so the question is, what's going to happen with the facilities budget? COVID is spiking and it looks like it's here to stay. We need proper protection to do our work along with everyone else.
Well, absolutely. Thanks for that question. So, yeah, COVID, it does look like we're entering into another wave of COVID. And as such, we know that a couple of things have come from the ministry. One is that the PPE equipment and protection that has been in place from the ministry is continuing until the end of this school year. At the very minimum, that's been told to us. We continue to have masks delivered to schools for those that want to, for both staff and students in terms of moving forward. And we continue to have enhanced cleaning protocols. So the money allocated through some of the COVID dollars from the ministry for enhanced cleaning in classrooms and touch points at certain high frequency or high volume touch points, all of that will continue. In addition to that, our board and our board of trustees who have been on top of COVID and making sure that our schools are safe, they approved through our budget the ability to enhance our cleaning at our schools. And so we will continue with that until the end of the year. So in terms of this wave of COVID that's happening right now, there's no noticeable difference in terms of budget reduction until the end of this school year for all the measures that we have in place. Obviously, we'll have to reevaluate that in terms of what happens next year and where we are in September in terms of COVID and and all those effects. But we continue to do all we have done up to date and continue to be diligent in the facilities and in other areas with respect to ensuring that our schools are safe for our kids, and we were committed to doing that.
Thank you so much for that response. Next question, what does right-sized staffing look like in the next few years? What does it mean for teachers in reality? I'm going to pass that over to Ryan.
Yeah, thanks, Shazia. So in terms of right sizing, really what we're looking at is, we're declining by about 4,000 students. And so that will result in adjustment. About every 25 students is a classroom or a teaching assignment. And so our staffing projections right now do have us making an adjustment of in the neighborhood of about 380 teachers from this year to next year. However, a lot of that will be absorbed through retirements, through leaves as people come and go from maternity leaves and other types of leaves, and through long-term teaching assignment opportunities. And so we will be looking to make that adjustment. For context across the system, we have about 200 schools. And so we're talking that it's quite possible on average that, that will be 1 to 2 teachers per school. Some schools are declining by a little bit more than others. There's a few school communities that are actually seeing some growth. But in general, right sizing the system really means that we just need to organize our schools to open in September as if we have the 83,000 students. What is it we need in terms of our classroom organization? Thanks, Shazia.
Thanks, Ryan. I'm going to pass this next question to you as well. If the government controls most of the funding and tells the board how to spend it, what's the point of getting feedback on the budget?
That's a great question. Yes, the province does provide us a lot of prescripted funding direction and criteria. But within that, we do have some latitude in terms of how we implement certain programs, priorities, and direction. The nature of the supports and resources. A good example is funding we receive for special education. When we develop our special education plan, might determine whether or not we need more in the area of EAs or social work or CYCs. So we have that latitude and flexibility when it comes to supporting our schools and the communities, the type of investments that we might make, the types of resource needs we might require, feedback around the supports for technology, different programs that we're running. Those are the types of things that we have some latitude and discretion. The Board of Trustees absolutely ultimately have options. We always do in terms of some of the areas that we'll focus our spending. The types of maintenance and other investments that we make as well, our transportation supports and services and policies. So your input really is important when it comes to us making some decisions around where there may be a community emphasis or priority. And we do have that opportunity. So although there's a lot of rules and sometimes it's not the easiest to make changes, and there's certainly some things that we'd like to do that we can't, and some things that we could do that we probably don't want to. So all of your feedback and input actually allows us to then have some conversation around where we're going to focus some of those discussions and decisions. Thanks, Shazia.
Great, thanks. Everyone, I'm sure you're noticing we're trying to answer as many questions as possible. I know I have dozens that have come in, so we're trying to keep our responses as tight as possible so we can get to these questions. The next question here, all right, could you speak to funding for teacher librarians and library learning commons across the board? These roles and programs are important for the academic success of all students. I think that's Ryan again.
Actually, I'm going to be brief and then ask if Superintendent Fernandez or DeMarco or Campbell would like to pick it up. We do get funding for library supports. Our model has been library technicians and supports. There's no intention of changing our level and support of service in terms of our libraries and our learning commons and creating those spaces to be an effective space, collaborative space, and learning space for our students. Shazia, if any of the colleagues has something to add, first one in will be the one that could supplement.
Okay, I see Lori here. Thanks, Lori.
Thank you for that question. Yes, we continue to support our teacher librarians, as Ryan mentioned, through the staffing models, and the library learning commons continue to come from the school budgets. We are also putting a bit of focus right now on developing our online libraries. So we will be having discussions about what monies will be allocated to the libraries for supporting that. And again, continuing to support that through our block budgets at the school level.
Great, thanks so much. This question I'm going to be passing on to Derek. Further to the facilities question, what more is being done in terms of proper ventilation, more filters, and adding more fresh air into school buildings?
Thanks, Shazia. Yeah, that's a great question. And I think one of the things, and maybe I'll take a step back and just talk a little bit about what we've done to date. So again, Toronto Catholic District School Board was ahead of the curve in terms of having portable filters in all of our classrooms. The Board of Trustees approved a purchase last year that allowed us to do a significant purchase, which was then supplemented by money from the ministry. And so we have been invested in making sure that ventilation in our classroom has been the number one priority. In addition to that, we have a lot of projects underway across the system through the COVID recovery infrastructure funding from the federal government and provincial government, which will augment some of the ventilation systems in our schools. We have projects to help with windows, which allows for the exchange of air that are happening within classrooms. And we continue to examine our schools in terms of the efficiency of all the filtration systems that are in them and moving forward. And so we're using MERV 13s and doing that. One of the things that we're also exploring is what can we do in our schools that are non-ventilated. We have a significant portion of our inventory, because we have older schools that have non-ventilation. So that means there's no mechanical ventilation in the schools. And what we're doing is undertaking a project with Superintendent Zolmi Slitch in capital development to understand what can we do to ameliorate the situation there. And that's, even though it's a longer term study, it's one of the things that has been prompted through some of the experiences this year. And so what you can expect is that in a lot of schools, you'll see new ventilation related projects happening throughout the summer. Some are happening right now at some schools, split systems that allow for air to come into individual classrooms. And we've got a number of things underway, and we'll continue to do. So this won't just be a stop with the end of COVID. We will continue to focus on ventilation and improve our classroom ventilation and our school ventilation moving forward. And then the one great thing that I should also point out is with all our new schools and builds, the Toronto Catholic District School Board has been fortunate to get a lot of projects with new schools and redeveloped schools. And so as we do those schools, we naturally increase the ventilation and put in mechanical ventilation in new schools and make sure that our schools are fully ventilated. So that portion of our inventory will definitely be enhanced, and then we will continue to do to make sure that we do that. The other last thing I'll say real quick is that even in our portables, all of our portables have ventilation systems. They use MERV 13 filters, and all new portables that we bring into the system have air conditioning. Now that's more of a comfort thing rather than a ventilation thing, but just to demonstrate the level of commitment and investment that we're making in ventilation, it's across the system in multiple areas.
Thanks for that fulsome response, Derek. I know that's top of mind for a lot of families and definitely our staff, so I'm sure that response was appreciated. The next question is actually going to be for you again. It is, what is the school board planning to do with thousands of purchased plexiglass dividers that are now sitting in storage? Is the school planning on recycling these, perhaps trying to garner some of the money back?
Thanks, Shazia. It's an interesting question, and it's a great question in terms of what do we do with what we have. I don't know if we can garner money from that, but we definitely are exploring ways, if we have to dispose of them in a manner that's aligned with best environmental practices. So that for sure will happen. I think I did want to say in terms of plexiglass, and I spoke to this a little bit earlier, COVID has been has had evolving understanding in both the medical community and the school community. And so those plexiglass dividers were purchased at a time where the thinking was that those were an established and a good way to stop the spread of the disease. As more science has come about, as the medical community has understood the virus and how it transmits a little bit more, the effectiveness of those plexiglass dividers has been questioned, and there's some debate in terms of their effectiveness. And as such, that's why we have a high number in inventory. But I think I wouldn't go back and change anything, because I think as we implemented the measures at the time that we thought were best to protect our children. And I want people to understand that was always our students came first. We wanted to make sure we did that. And as the medical community and the science evolved, so did our thinking and our measures that we put into place. So yes, we do have a huge inventory. I don't know. I can't tell you what we're going to exactly do with those right now. If we can repurpose them, we will. Keep in my mind, that huge inventory was an investment well worth it in terms of trying to make sure that we protected our children based on what the best medical advice was at the time.
Thank you, Derek. The next question I'm going to be passing over back to Ryan. What is the IL, I believe that's short for International Languages Program, costing the board? How much money could be saved if it was moved to after school and weekends like every other board in this province?
Thank you, Shazia. Excuse me. The board does invest in the area of international languages as part of our day school program. Where we look at an annual cost of about $6 to $7 million to support the program. There is an annual report that goes to our Student Achievement Committee early in the calendar year in January or February that does provide an overview of the program, the participation, the schools, and also the financial investment. It is our budget plan this year is obviously to continue supporting that program. It's a priority of our board of trustees, and so we've made that program decision and investment. So we're looking at about $6 to $7 million as the annual cost, Shazia. Thanks.
Great, thanks. We have two questions here related to special education. So I'm going to ask both of them, and I think I'll start with you, Ryan, and perhaps you might want to pass it over to Superintendent Fernandez. Can more money be budgeted towards special education needs students? And how will right sizing impact special education specifically?
Okay, thanks, Shazia. In terms of our board's commitment to supporting the special services budget and our special education envelope, we do receive annually about $135 million of funding, and our spending is typically about $30 million more than that. So this year's budget numbers are expenses of $168 million against revenue of $135 million. That's been our sort of our typical spend in that area. We realize that it's an area of priority. There is some funding that supports some of that $30 million gap that comes to us in other areas in terms of the general grants. But we've always made sure that we're spending a significant amount, and rightly so, in terms of our special education supports. In terms of the impact, as I said in my presentation, about half the funding for special education is enrollment related, and the other half actually is tied specifically to students and their specific needs. The adjustments we'll be making is that in our staffing model, there are ratios in terms of special education teachers that are assigned generally to the schools based on the student population. Those are adjustments that will be made that will help us to address the loss of revenue in terms of the special education envelope. However, last night at SEAC, and in conversation with Superintendent Meehan, Superintendent Fernandez, Directors Council, and the Board of Trustees, our commitment is to make sure that we continue to spend at least that usual amount beyond what we receive. So in other words, we're losing revenue for students. We're going to be adjusting the number of special education teachers, not changing service levels and support levels in schools. And right now, we seem to be in a position that we can actually sustain and maintain the current staffing levels for EAs, social workers, child and youth workers, et cetera. And so we're not looking at a change really in our service levels in special education. We're just adjusting, those teacher supports to the size of the schools. Thanks, Shazia. If Superintendent Fernandez has anything further to offer, I'd appreciate a supplement.
Thanks for passing that over, Ryan. I appreciate that. So I concur. We are going to continue to provide supports to all of our special education students. As we know, the supports are driven by the IEPs that students have in place, and staff continue to support the IEPs regardless of who's working with the students. So basically, IEPs need to be honored and they need to be supported. In addition, depending on where students are placed, the placements also impact the type of support that students get. However, all of those supports will continue to be offered. There will continue to be the 5 placements that the ministry has identified, and all the identifications that the ministry have identified will continue to be supported through special services, not only in a class, but also through programs that support special needs in students, and also mental health needs in students. So that will continue to be offered and supported. And we know that as we go forward, we will continue to make sure that their needs and priorities are met.
Thank you so much. Next question, does the board anticipate any negative impacts to specific student programming? Sorry, Ryan, I'm just going to pass that to you.
Oh, okay. The short answer, because I know sometimes I can go for a little bit on, when I get into something, the short answer is no, there's not going to be any impacts on our programming for students for next year. And if anything, as we start to unpack the right to read, the kindergarten readiness, learning recovery, we're actually looking to focus and support additional programs and supports for students. And as well, our investment in the area of equity will see additional supports and programs as well. Thanks.
Thank you. Next questions around, Christina, did you want to jump in?
Yes, I just wanted to add that in addition to the items that Ryan has mentioned, that we also will continue to support through our tutoring program, which we're rolling out as we speak.
Great, thank you for adding that in. The next question is around outdoor play spaces. What efforts are being made to improve outdoor play spaces, and will there be any additional investments? I believe that might be a question either starting with you, Ryan, or perhaps Milka.
Yes, thanks, Shazia. Yes, it can go to either Milka or to Derek, or one or both.
Thanks, Shazia. So I'll start, and I don't know if Superintendent Zlomyslich has anything that she'd like to add, but I think Ryan mentioned it in his budget presentation that the board did put some money aside. I believe it's 1.2 million that's gone into the annual renewal budget. So that money there is to help with some of the outdoor play environments and some of that. Some of the particulars around that. The other piece, as I mentioned earlier, the CIVRS money, I know I'm using that acronym, but it's basically COVID recovery infrastructure money from the federal government. There's a lot of projects that are going to be underway over the next couple of months as we get into the good weather that are funded through that stream that also will help with outdoor play environments, outdoor classroom, outdoor education at our schools. So there are significant investments underway. The Board of Trustees has deemed it a priority and continue, and so have embedded it in the renewal budget moving forward, and then we'll continue to do projects to improve playgrounds across the city and the system, and outdoor environments across the system. Now, we are a big system, and so we've got a lot of older infrastructure, but we continue to invest heavily and new investments and continue to renew our existing investments. I don't know if Superintendent Zlomyslich, if you want to add anything to that I may have missed.
Sure. I just want to reiterate that that $1.2 million is a committed annual amount, as Director Boyce said, going forward in every renewal plan. And it supports projects where we might not be doing site work that's necessary because of it hasn't been identified in the asset management database, but where we have projects that have been identified, for example, paving projects or other site work, we do try where we can to include playground improvements where it's feasible. So that's how we support the playground redevelopment at our schools.
Thank you for that response. The next question is a technology related question. I think this one will likely go to Steve. What is the board doing with all the technology that was provided to schools for kids during COVID? Will schools get to keep them? A lot of schools are in need of technology, as we have seen, and I think the board should fund this more or completely instead of having schools and parents fundraise thousands of dollars every year to get these items.
Thanks, Shazia. I appreciate the question. Something that, and as Ryan mentioned earlier in his presentation, we are looking to make some significant investments in technology for next year. Coming out of the pandemic, we do realize and have learned the importance of technology. While we hope we're not in virtual learning in future waves of the pandemic, if there are future waves, we do recognize that technology does play an important role in how we deliver learning in the classroom environment. So we do want to provide more technology to students, to classrooms. We actually have a plan that came to the board on Tuesday that was our first sort of iteration discussion with our board of trustees around what to do with devices and to come up with a plan. We're still having that conversation. We haven't formalized anything yet, but to give folks a sense, we are looking to build a very robust 4-year plan that's going to get to the point, we hope, where we're going to have closer to a one-to-one program. Certainly for the higher grades, we're looking from grades 6 to 12 to build a one-to-one program where students would have access to devices, and in the lower grades from JK to 5 having more devices available to students. So overall, a significant investment in student devices. That's a combination of dollars that we're putting towards this, and we're also looking at what are the possibilities with the existing student devices, but there's still more discussion to be had on that. But a significant investment in technology over the next few years, and we hope to be in a much better place as we go forward. Thank you.
Great, thanks for that response. Next question here. Sorry, there's a bunch of questions coming in, and maybe I'll just use this as a quick opportunity to remind everyone you have 2 spots where you can send in your questions. So if you're joining us through Zoom, there's a Q&A button and you can type your question, and then I'll get the question here. And then if you're joining us on YouTube, in the comment section, you can type out your question and it'll make its way to me as well. So moving along here. Okay, many schools have portables. What is the plan to reduce the number of portables over all schools, both elementary and secondary? I think that's for you, Derek.
Yeah, thanks, Shazzy. I appreciate that. Yeah, we do have a number of portables across the system. And that number, I will say on a couple of notes. One, that positively, that number gets reduced every time we open a new school or build a new school, because we hopefully deflect or absorb some of that capacity in the new school. I think one of the things, and the other piece that just to get not educate, but bring some awareness to people in terms of our capital priorities process. So our capital priorities process is heavily weighted on capacity. So schools that are over that have higher utilization than where they should have, or have a lot of portables on site. That carries a lot of weight in what we submit to the government moving forward for new schools. So through that process is how we try to attempt to mitigate some of that, is in trying to get capital priority projects and capital priority schools so that we can do that. We always are taking a look at our enrollment at different schools, looking to see what we can do to balance that and make sure that that happens. But the reality of it is, to be quite frank, is that in certain areas of the school, as infill continues to grow, certain areas as the lack of available schools in that area, some schools will have portables and will continue to have portables. And it's not something that we are in favor of, but it's something that we have to accept as a reality. But we do try, we meet regularly. I just met regularly with staff a couple of weeks ago to look at what our portable plan looks like for next year, and where we can reduce and where we can mitigate some of that portable usage through schools and the use of schools, we try to do. But unfortunately, portables are our way of life, but we definitely are cognizant of the fact that it's not the ideal thing to have at a school site, because it either takes away from playgrounds and play space, or in some cases, or it disconnects a little bit from the school. So we don't take it lightly, but we accede to the fact that we have to do it in certain cases. But we do meet regularly to try to figure out what to do on those.
Great, thanks. I'm going to keep it with you, Derek. Next question is about snow removal. Actually, there's a couple of questions about this. I'm going to try to group them into one, and one question is quite lengthy, so bear with me, everyone. How much money is spent on snow removal, and is any of the money sent to individual schools for salt to take care of small patches of ice? Is there a way for us to include snow removal into the budget for playgrounds, along with some temporary fencing to go around the piles of snow to ensure they are not accessible to students?
Thanks, Shazia, and thanks for the question, whoever sent that question in. Yeah, and it's no more relevant than the winter we had this year with a lot of snow moving forward. I'll try to answer all parts of that question. In terms of the first part, in terms of, I don't know the budget offhand, but I can say that, each school is equipped with what is necessary to handle salting and snow. So each school should, I haven't heard of a case where a school didn't have enough salt or it wasn't allocated, and that our system supervisors and custodial staff monitor that. So that shouldn't be an issue. The second part of that question is a great question in terms of playgrounds. Our board contract focuses on pathways, walkways, and parking lots in terms of removal of snow. So snow removal is not in any school in terms of at the playground facility. And I know a lot of schools have blacktop areas. I've been told that previously that has been investigated, and the cost for that number was quite exorbitant in terms of removal of snow, because some places you don't have areas to push that snow, so you actually have to remove it off site. In a lot of places, actually, that's the case, and so that cost is quite substantial. It would be quite substantial, so I'm told. It's something that we continue to take a look at, because we do get that request, but we work closely with our academic partners to ensure that hopefully principals, and I know there's a lot of movements, are communicating playground protocol around snow that may be accumulating in schoolyards. Now, so when we have a mild winter, it's not a problem. But when we have a winter like we just had, that snow can accumulate. We got 55 centimeters, I think, in one day or in the course of 24 hours. And then we got snow week after week. So yes, this year was a problem. We continue to look at ideas such as, could we fence it off? It's not always feasible. It's not always the best, because depending on that fence, you've got to be portable, and that fencing causes issues as well. And then that will also get in the way of sometimes clearing pathways and stuff. So it is an issue we're aware of. Unfortunately, it's something that currently, it's not something we do. We continue to look to see what the best way forward, but that cost to remove snow at our 200 locations in the playground areas, and we have some playgrounds that are big, some that are small, some that need removal, some that where you could store, is a substantial cost. And so as such, our playground protocol, our winter playground protocol that we work with our academic partners, is how we try to mitigate that issue of snow accumulation on site in the winter.
Thank you very much, Derek. The next question is a question around equity. I think I'm going to start with Ryan for that, and then perhaps our superintendent, Christina Fernandez. There have been so many issues surrounding equity for many years with no change. Do you feel that the amount set aside for equity is adequate, given the fact that there has been little change, but problems surrounding equity are on the rise? We need proper money set aside to support effective change and new initiatives that will make a difference.
Thank you, Shazia. Yes, I appreciate the question. We are making an investment this year of an additional $2 million into the area of equity, appreciating that that there's a lot of work to be done. What I would say is the area of equity is very broad, but then we know that within different communities, there are some very specific and real issues that we need to start addressing. It is a board priority. It is a priority of our director, that we are going to make sure that we continue to advance on all fronts and continue to respond to the needs of the communities. In the last couple of years, some school boards, and we've been fortunate, were able to introduce the position of a human rights and equity advisor. We've been doing some good work in that area, and just recently have initiated some grad coaches for our Black students in our secondary schools as we make some investments. And we continue to do some really intentional professional learning, both in terms of our academic staff, but also in terms of our corporate and support staff, in terms of issue awareness and starting to put some of the intended supports and initiatives into practice. We are very pleased and proud of the working relationship that we've established with our Race Relations Committee, with our Indigenous Education Advisory Committee, and also with the African Canadian Advisory Committee. Really good feedback, really good working relationships. candid feedback as well in terms of some of the things that we need to focus on and address. Not all of the changes are going to necessarily require a lot of money or resourcing. And so what I've tried to make clear when we've been meeting with these different groups is it isn't about necessarily a specific dollar amount. We need to come up with and implement high yield, high impact, effective strategies that get to the core of the issues. And then the resourcing will be provided to support it. So I leave that as a backdrop if Superintendent Fernandez has anything further to add.
Well, thank you. So in addition to that, as Ryan, as you've said, all of our advisory groups are definitely our starting point in terms of listening to our partners and then working with our community partners in order to address the different needs that arise through those dialogues. We have increased, as you mentioned, to support the staff over the last few years, which has been very instrumental in not only rolling out a number of training opportunities, but also to increase sensitivity to the issues surrounding the needs in the system, and to develop and continue to implement strategies that address these issues head on, working to address systemic inequities that happen in the system. We also work with our students in terms of understanding student voice and addressing what comes from them in terms of what they see as needs in our system. And we use that information to help develop and bring back to our internal committees and our external committees to have that dialogue to make sure that we are addressing the inequities that are happening. We are continuously reviewing our policies to ensure that our policies are in line with the needs of the communities that we service. So all of these things together are definitely helping us in terms of moving forward in this area. Thanks for the question.
Thank you very much to you both. Next question, I'm going to pass that back to you, Ryan. A recent trend at large organizations is to increase the size of their in-house legal team in order to perform more of the litigation and solicitors' work in-house and reduce the external legal fees spent. This amounts to a substantial cost savings to the organization while building a greater in-house expertise. Any thoughts of similar plans at the board?
Yes, thanks, Shazia. Appreciate the question. Yeah, absolutely. There is, there's no shortage of need for expert legal advice in an organization of our size and in the school board sector. Tremendously complex issues. We have been actually building our in-house legal team in terms of different disciplines in our areas of employee relations, in our areas of policy, human rights support, as well as on our commercial and property side. And we're actually right now going through a recruitment process to hire a backfill replacement for our longstanding general counsel who is just retired. So we will be we'll be asking that individual to come in and actually take carriage of our legal team, all of our lawyers, and to continue to look at our in-house complement, our in-house disciplines and area of expertise, to manage the relationship with some of our external legal firms that we have been using and relying on for specific expertise. There will always be the need for some niche support from some external firms. And there are some issues that are, provincial in impact or transcend more just in the board. And there will be times when a particular firm might be leading that process or that advisory on behalf of a number of boards. So we'll always have a mix, but absolutely, the more we can develop in-house capacity, the better in terms of both efficiency, response, support, and as well financial. Thanks, Shazia.
Thanks so much. Next question, what plans are there for hiring social workers, additional assistants for schools that have high attendance of students with special education needs, where there is very minimal support at the moment?
Thanks. So thank you for the question. So the way that we operate, we look at the different needs across the system. When we're allocating staff to the different areas and the different schools, according to their needs, according to the issues that may come up, we definitely look at our allocation of staff, and we allocate staff according to those needs. So where we know that there are schools that may require additional support, we do allocate additional support staff. In this case, social workers, psychologists, speech and language pathologists, to schools where there may be a higher need, where students may have more significant difficulties. So it's proportionally distributed to make sure that we are addressing the highest needs. And we do have a layer in terms of the mental health piece, a layer of mental health support that are actually, again, distributed throughout the system, but also that are definitely responding to the highest needs in the system. Many of our staff, our professional staff, also are often called to deal with particular situations that might occur with students. We want to make sure that we are addressing every student's need. And as a result, we do make sure that that distribution is according to the population that we have in schools, but also according to where the needs are arising. And we are responsive to those needs as we need to be, to make sure that students are receiving the support they need.
Great. While I have you, Christina, maybe you can answer this question as well. At the elementary level, why does the special education program begin at grade 4, at the grade 4 level with a special education teacher for English and math, and not start at the grade 1 level?
So thank you for the question. The special education does address student needs across the system, from kindergarten across all grades to grade 12. So I'm not quite sure with respect to that question, but I can. That's a question I think that could be taken back to the school for dialogue. We do provide special education supports in multiple settings. So it could be in the regular class, it could be with the special education teacher, it could also be in the special intensive support class. So it can be provided in many different ways. Depending on what the needs of the students are, we allocate to schools as well different programs to make sure that we are addressing the specific need and or the niche concern that we need to be able to respond to. So with respect to starting in grade 4, that's not necessarily our practice in starting in grade 4, but again, it depends on the needs in particular communities. And so this might be a community response in terms of the needs that arise in that particular school.
Great, thanks so much, Christina. So I know some people have joined a bit later, and there's some questions around the numbers and a presentation for the budget. So if you are joining a bit later, the first part of this session was actually devoted to our CFO did make a presentation and share some information around the considerations and what the budget sort of looks like. If you did miss that part, as I mentioned, this session is being recorded, and we will have this session available online. You'll have access to it in the links that will be shared with all staff and all families tomorrow when the budget survey goes live as well. So again, if you did miss that, you can catch that by watching the first 20 minutes of this session tomorrow. Okay, so next question here. You mentioned in the initial presentation about tutoring supports for some schools and communities. Can you please elaborate more on this and when you plan to roll this out, and which communities will benefit from the program? I'm going to start with you, Christina. Thanks.
So thank you for that question. It's a good question. We will be rolling out tutoring supports across the entire system. So it will be rolled out to all schools. And so there will be different programs that we'll be rolling out depending on specific areas. So we are looking at schools that might have had, for example, additional cases of COVID. And so we'll begin with schools where there perhaps may have been greater impacts to student learning, but then looking at all of our programs, we're looking at rolling out programs during the day, after school. We're looking at weekends, and we're also looking at the summer program. The tutoring program is beginning now and is running from now until the end of December. So there will be a lot of programs being rolled out over time.
Thank you very much, Christina. Okay, the next question, sorry, just bear with me here. Teacher professional development sessions, increasing, decreasing, is there no change, and why? I think I'll start with you there, Ryan, please.
Sorry, Shazia. My apologies. I think that might actually be one that falls to one of our academic colleagues. Lori seems to be jumping in there. Thanks, Lori.
Thanks for that question. Sorry about that. Thank you for the question. In terms of professional learning, we continue to receive that funding through the ministry, and it is directed. We have had some challenges in delivering it this year because of the number of occasional teachers that we're trying to reserve for the schools and not pull teachers out for PD as much. So we've been coming up with creative ways to offer PD to teachers without actually covering them in the classes. In addition to that, the ministry has allocated funds for next year, so we will continue to review the situation at the time. The other impact we've had this year has also been related to labor sanctions and the inability to pull teachers out for that professional learning as much as we used to be able to. So we are looking at creative ways to do that. We hope that things will be settling into the future and that we can return to a combination of our current model of professional learning and our previous model of in-person professional learning where it's appropriate or in the classroom.
Lori, don't go anywhere. Next question is for you as well. Can more money be budgeted towards faith learning, retreats, etc.? Lori, I think that one's for you.
Sorry about that. Our sound cut out where we are. Could you just please repeat the question?
Yes, no problem. Can more money be budgeted towards faith learning, retreats, etc.?
So the funding that is allocated there is through our Nurturing Catholic Community department. We continue to support, as we have in the past, those areas, and will continue to do that going into the future.
Thank you very much. There's some questions here that are not necessarily related to the budget per se, so I'm going to save them to the end. If we have time, we will get to some of those, but I'm going to focus the questions that we asked our panelists specifically around the budget, given the nature of tonight's session is the budget. Okay, I think we did get to this question a bit earlier. I believe Derek and Milka both responded to outdoor play. This question is slightly different, and I believe someone may have joined a bit later, so I'm going to ask it. What is the board's idea around funding improvements to playgrounds and schoolyards? I know a number of the public schools in our area have had large improvements made to their playgrounds in the form of a paved track, improved grass, and playgrounds.
Thanks, Shazia. Yeah, so we did tackle that question earlier, so maybe I'll just give a quick Coles Notes in terms of the answer I gave previously and then look at the second part of that question. So the first part of that question is really, I spoke about our boards of trustees and how they've embedded 1.2 million in our annual renewal budget for outdoor play environments and outdoor structures and such. I also talked about CIVRIS funding, our COVID resilience funding, which is a federal provincial program, which has a number of projects which will be underway this spring that will help to tackle some of those outdoor elements. And then just our annual renewal plan, which does that as well, as we take a look at it, renewing our existing infrastructure, but we are a big system. The second part of that question, I want to take a little bit of a different spin on it, is so we continue to look for, or not even look for, but when we are approached on partnerships that will help the school community in terms of, so we have some locations which have artificial fields and track facilities, which have been partnerships with public-private partnerships that have allowed us to augment the outdoor fields and track areas at some schools. And when that's appropriate and when we have that ability to do that, we bring it to the Board of Trustees and we explore those options to do so. We also continue, we have a partnership group that also looks and works with across with community organizations. Our planning team works with the City of Toronto to take a look at where we can enter into partnerships to help improve our assets, our outdoor assets. And so there's a number of prongs and areas that we explore to help that and move that along.
Thank you very much for the summary of that. Moving along here. So it's a question related to mental health supports. Does the board plan to hire more mental health staff and supports? What portion of next year's budget will be allocated to mental health supports and services? I think I'm going to start with Christina and then perhaps Ryan.
Thank you for the question. My understanding is that we're continuing with the current level of mental health supports. So we will continue to offer these supports as necessary and as situations come up in schools. We also intend to continue to offer professional learning for staff and presentations to students as part of their learning in terms of understanding how mental health impacts them.
Yeah, thanks, Shazia, and as well. So we have a dedicated mental health lead, and then there's a team of mental health workers that absolutely support our schools and the different programs and initiatives. But then also more broadly across our special services division, when you look at the different supports, whether it's social work and child and youth workers and graduation coaches, et cetera, that are also really attuned and able to support students with some of their challenges that they've been working through. Recently, the province has come out and made it clear that the mental health and student well-being is absolutely a key part, if not the first priority for school boards right now, in addition to attending to learning recovery needs. And so we're absolutely attuned to that. So there's a funded component of our budget from the province that we use in terms of the key specific dedicated mental health team. But then we also make sure, as Superintendent Fernandez has indicated, that we're also using our general budget to provide additional supports, training, resources, et cetera. Thanks.
Ryan, don't go anywhere. I'm going to pass this next question over to you. I've heard some school enrollment, our school enrollments have dropped quite a bit. Is the board planning for any staff reductions for the upcoming budget year?
Thanks, Shazia. Yes, we will be adjusting our schools to the number of staff that they would generate, and specifically in terms of our classroom teacher assignments. Our schools are organized in terms of their student enrollment. We are going to be down in enrollment as a system as a whole and across a number of communities, and so we'll be making adjustments to our staffing levels. There will be the same class sizes that we are, funded for and required to operate. Unfortunately, we just need less classes as the system shrinks in terms of our overall enrollment.
Okay, thank you. I think I might actually ask this question to you again, Ryan. How may advocacy for funding for international languages from our board to the province, because IL is as important to all languages and should include Indigenous languages. Also, with Ukrainian children being displaced, they may need IL. What is the board planning to do to address this?
Thanks, Shazia. Right now, in terms of advocacy for the International Languages Program, it is a local board initiative. There's a couple school boards that do offer it. In terms of the province's focus around secondary languages, we are funded for our French as a second language, so French immersion programs. And there's funding that comes to us for students where English is a second language and our English language learners. And so that is right now the ministry's area of focus in terms of language instruction beyond core English. We do run our evening and weekend programs, which is pretty common across most boards. In terms of the potential influx of Ukrainian students, actually just yesterday, the Minister of Education did confirm that boards should be receiving Ukrainian students, but also they would be coming to us, and you would expect this, obviously without cost. And so they're, typically anybody that's coming to us from out of country does have to pay for their cost of education. That's being waived, and actually the province is going to fund us for students from the Ukraine as though they're Ontario-based students. So we will be receiving the funding. We're also ready for the reality of additional supports that are going to be needed as these students come to us as we deal with their displacement and some of the.
Great, thank you very much. So just letting everyone know it's 7:20. I know we have 10 more minutes. There's just a few more questions that I have. We might be able to get through all of them, so we're just going to try to rapid fire. Ryan, this question's for you and perhaps our superintendent, Michael Liberto, but I'll start with you. How much does the board spend on school bus transportation? Is this a budget area that can be reviewed? Ryan, you might not be able to hear us. I think you're frozen. Okay, we'll just pause for a moment and see if Ryan joins us again. There we go.
I'm so sorry.
No worries. You want me to repeat the question, Ryan? Are you good?
Yeah, I'm going to need you to. I apologize, folks. The storms just hit me out where I am in Durham, so it dropped me on my internet.
No worries. I'll repeat the question. So how much does the board spend on school bus transportation? Is this a budget area that can be reviewed?
Sure. And actually, I might actually have Superintendent Liberto, if you're still with us as well, who oversees and supports our transportation. High level, our spending on transportation is about 40 million. Our funding is around 30 million. And we know that transportation is a really important investment for us as a school board. Michael, if you wanted to take any other parts of the question or expand, please feel free.
Thanks, Mr. Putnam. Just to echo your earlier comments, certainly student transportation is important for TCDSB and certainly helps us attract additional students. But to your question, I guess the part of the question regarding reviewing the area of spending, I think we're constantly looking at ways to enhance or improve our student transportation, but mindful of the fact that there is a budget envelope, and unfortunately, the provincial allocation doesn't quite cover the cost of providing all student transportation.
Thank you very much. Okay, we only have a few more questions, and these ones aren't directly related to the budget. Because we have some time, I'm going to go through some of these. So there's one specifically around e-learning class caps and what that looks like. So I believe, Lori, that would be a question for you.
Thank you for that question. With regard to the new requirement of 2 e-learning credits for graduation for the students who are currently in grade 10 and any other students that come into high school now, so our current grade 9s and any future high school students, they will require 2 credits to graduate. The class sizes for those will be 30 for any courses that are taken through e-learning.
Thank you very much. Okay, there's some questions I know we've already answered. So just a reminder to everyone, if you're tuning in a bit later, we did answer a lot of questions around special education. I see some additional ones coming in, so please tune in. This is being recorded and you'll have access to the link tomorrow on our website. We'll make sure everyone has access to the links when we send you the budget survey tomorrow. This will probably be the last question. Again, it's not related, but I think Steve Camacho would probably be the best to answer. It's a bit lengthy, so just please bear with me. Many parent engagement events funded by Pro Grants have moved from in-person to online. Parents are attending educational webinars. There are different sets of questions. Some parents have privacy concerns. Who should they direct their questions or concerns to? Passing that over to you, Steve.
Yeah, thanks, Shazia. First, like I say, is if you're using your Pro Grants, that's great. I think that's a positive thing for your school community. So generally speaking, we do have a privacy department. So if you have questions around privacy, certainly you can direct it to our privacy department. The person in charge of that area is named Brian Shannon. So you can certainly look for his name and reach out to him if you had any particular questions. just I'm not sure what platform. There's a comment there on the platform being used. I'm not sure what platform that your school community might be using for that. I will say if your school community is using Zoom, which is the platform that we have license for the entire organization, that is something that we have secured strong privacy controls around and strong privacy contract around with Zoom. In fact, we were one of the first boards to do that in the province and helped negotiate a bit of a province-wide contract that a lot of other school boards jumped onto. So if you're using that platform, I think you're in a good place. If you're not using that platform, maybe a conversation with your school principal to make sure that that's a platform of choice for those kinds of events would be the optimum place. If you have additional questions, certainly reach out to our privacy department. Happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you very much for taking that question. Okay, everyone, I'm going to just start to wrap up here. Again, there's actually just a handful of questions that are remaining. However, we have answered those questions multiple times in the session. If you're just joining us, again, a reminder, the session is being recorded and we will make the session available to everyone tomorrow. So I want to just take a moment to thank everyone for their time this evening. It was great spending the last hour and a half with all of you. Thanks to all of our panelists for being here and responding to your questions. Thanks so much to all of you for joining today's session. As I shared, tomorrow morning, all of our staff, all of our stakeholders, and all of our families will receive information about the budget survey. We have a number of questions. We wanted today's session to be informative, answer your questions so that hopefully starting tomorrow, you'll be in a position to respond to the survey questions. The survey opens tomorrow and it will close 2 weeks from now. The following 2 weeks, the Friday, I'm trying to remember what that date is now at the top of my head here. It will be closing on the 22nd of April. So please, it'll take about 5 to 10 minutes for you to answer those questions. We really look forward to receiving your responses, and that will inform the next report that will be going to the Board of Trustees in May, I believe, that I know our CFO, Ryan Putnam, will be presenting and speaking to based on the feedback received. So thanks again, everyone. Thank you so much for all of your time. Again, we'll have Q&As tomorrow that are available, the recorded session and the survey. So please stay tuned and check your emails tomorrow. Thanks so much, everyone, and have a great night.